the first speaker today, who is Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She is the founder of the Schiller Institute. She is the leading artificer of the Schiller Institute and of the LaRouche movement internationally. And of course, the widow of Lyndon H. LaRouche, and his closest political collaborator for over 50 years. She will deliver the keynote of today's proceedings under the headline, Principles of a New Security and Development Architecture.
Well, let me greet you wherever you may be. What has brought people from all over the world together here in this conference is the recognition that humanity is at a crossroad. There is clearly the danger that the present geopolitical confrontation between those forces who want to assert that the Western liberal model of democracy should be the only good and accepted one, and those who insist that the idea of an unipolar world is irrevocably past and has already been replaced by a multipolar world order, could lead to a thermonuclear war. Such a war could be ignited by design or by accident in the short term over the proxy war in Ukraine. Such a crisis could erupt before the end of the year. If the proposals made earlier this year by such people as Malcolm Chalmers, the Deputy General Secretary of the Royal United Service Institute, RUSI, to quote, cook the Russian frog by provoking a Cuban missile crisis on steroids, as he says, over an Ukrainian attempt to reconquer Crimea. Russia could view this as an existential threat and activate its nuclear arsenal on the highest alert and threaten its use, says Sharma. This would be a moment of extreme danger, he says, but because of the extreme imminent danger of such a situation, it would be easier for all parties to find compromises. To propose a policy which aims to drive the strategic conflict to the edge of the extinction of the human race does not even find a comment by the governments of the oh so good governments of the rules-based order. But to argue with the facts that the Russian intervention in Ukraine has a prehistory can in the worst case get you a jail sentence, according to a new law passed by the German parliament on October 20th with a change of Article 130 of the Criminal Code, Paragraph 5. In tune with this British perspective is apparently the Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister, Harilov, who just said in an interview with Sky News, we can step in Crimea by the end of December, and emphasized about the retaking of Crimea. It's only a matter of time. Of course, we would like to make it sooner than later. The British seem to want to excel themselves in creating world wars, as it was Boris Johnson who personally made sure in April that the promise of ending the war through negotiations was sabotaged. Unfortunately, it seems to be the majority of the transatlantic security establishment, many of whom just met at the Halifax International Security Conference, who agree the way to protect global democracy right now is with weapons and support for Ukraine's battle against Russia, not talks. Rejecting even the proposal of General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States, that it may now be the time for diplomacy. It is this criminal policy of nuclear brinkmanship which contains the danger of the annihilation of the entire human species in a global nuclear war and following nuclear winter, which is what automatically makes every individual on Earth a world citizen who has to take the responsibility for the outcome of this present conjuncture of human history. We therefore want to catalyze an international movement of world citizens who are committed to propose a new international security and development architecture, which will take into account the interest of every single country on the planet. This concept, to consider the interest of every country, was the principle of the Peace of Westphalia, which laid the basis for peace after 150 years of religious war in Europe, and represented the beginning of international law and laid the foundation for the UN Charter, which we need to uphold and reassert. What are the fundamental principles on which such a new global security and development architecture must be built? The absolute center for such a new architecture must be the image of man, about which all nations can agree. Man is differentiated from all other species by his gift of creative reason, that he or she is the only creature that can again and again discover new valid principles of the physical universe, and through the application of the scientific and technological progress in the production process, can increase the quality of life, longevity, and number of human beings living. It is that creative potential which makes human people sacred. The epoch which is coming to an end is the period of the last approximately 600 years, which began with the emergence of the sovereign nation state based on the writings of Nicolas of Cus and the first sovereign nation state of Louis XI in France in the 15th century, being concerned for the first time with the common good of the people, and the opposition to this idea on the side of the Venetian Empire. For 600 years, there has been a continuous battle between those two forms of government, between the sovereign nation state and the oligarchical form of society, vacillating back and forth, with sometimes a greater emphasis in this or that direction. All empires based on the oligarchical model were oriented towards protecting the privileges of the ruling elite, while trying to keep the masses of the population as backward as possible, because as sheep, they are easier to control. And we hear something about that a little later. It was considered normal to keep a certain portion of the people as slaves, or helots, as Schiller describes it in his writing about the laws of Solon and Lycurgus, which can be killed if they get too many. It was the same oligarchical outlook which was the basis of the ideology of Malthus and the underlying assumption of all colonial policies, including in the modern forms of colonialism, of which President Sukarno had warned in his speech at the first Bandung Conference in 1955. It is against this modern-day colonialism, against which there is now a powerful renaissance of the non-aligned movement, which is working on a new economic system involving the BRICS Plus, which more and more countries want to join, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, and other organizations of the Global South. Already during the Roman Empire, Christianity emerged, and for the first time in European civilization came the idea of the sacredness of each human person as in the image of the Creator, being gifted with that creative power, the, quote, vis creativa, as Cusa calls it, which emanates from his or her likeness with the Creator. That same idea is also found in the other two monotheistic religions, Judaism and Islam, as well as secular humanism, Confucianism, or Indian philosophy and religion in the tradition of the Vedic writings, as well as echoes of the idea found in other cultures. Whenever currents emerged in these religions which deviated from the idea that all human beings are sacred, like in the Crusades or the Inquisition, it meant they were instrumentalized by the oligarchical elites for their purposes. The new paradigm, which will be characteristic of the new epoch, and towards which the new global security and development architecture must be directed, therefore must eliminate the concept of oligarchism for good and proceed to organize a political order in such a way that the true character of humanity as the creative species can be realized. Therefore, I suggest that the following principles must be discussed and, if agreed upon, be realized. These ideas are meant to be food for thought and a dialogue among all people concerned to find a basis for a world order guaranteeing the durable existence of the human species. First, the new international security and development architecture must be a partnership of perfectly sovereign nation states, which is based on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence and the UN Charter. Second, the absolute priority must be to alleviate poverty in every nation on the planet, which is easily possible if the existing technologies are being used for the benefit of the common good. Third, the life expectancy of all people living must be prolonged to the fullest potential by creating modern health systems in every country on the planet. This is also the only way how the present and future potential pandemics can be overcome or be prevented. Fourth, since mankind is the only creative species known so far in the universe, and given the fact that human creativity is the only source of wealth through the potentially limitless discovery of new universal principles, one of the main aims of the new international security and development architecture must be providing access to universal education for every child and adult person living. The true nature of man is to become a beautiful soul, as Friedrich Schiller discusses this. And the only person who can fulfill that condition is the genius. Fifth, the international financial system must be reorganized so that it can provide productive credits to accomplish these aims. A reference point can be the original Bretton Woods system as Franklin D. Roosevelt intended it, but was never implemented due to his untimely death, and the 4 laws proposed by LaRouche. The primary aim of such a new credit system must be to increase dramatically the living standard of especially the nations of the global south and of the poor in the global north. 6, the new economic order must focus on creating the conditions for modern industries and agriculture, starting with the infrastructural development of all continents to eventually be connected by tunnels and bridges to become a world land bridge. 7th, the new global security architecture must eliminate the concept of geopolitics by ending the division of the world into blocks. The security concerns of every sovereign nation must be taken into account. Nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction must be immediately banned. Through international cooperation, the means must be developed to make nuclear weapons technologically obsolete, as it was originally intended by the proposal which became known as the SDI, suggested by LaRouche and made as an offer to the Soviet Union by President Reagan. 8th, in former times, one civilization at one corner of the world could go under, and the rest of the world would only find out years later due to the length of distances and the time needed for travel. Now, for the first time, because of nuclear weapons, pandemics, the internet, and other global effects, mankind is sitting in one boat. Therefore, a solution to the existential threat to humanity cannot be found with the help of secondary or partial arrangements, but the solution must be found on the level of that higher one, which is more powerful than the many. It requires the thinking on the level of the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites, of Nicolaus of Cusa. Ninth, in order to overcome the conflicts arising out of quarreling opinions, which is how empires have maintained control over the underlings, the economic, social, and political order has to be brought in cohesion with the lawfulness of the physical universe. In European philosophy, this was discussed as being in character with natural law. In Indian philosophy as cosmology, and in other cultures, appropriate notions can be found. Modern sciences like space science, biophysics, or thermonuclear fusion science will increase the knowledge of mankind about this lawfulness continuously. A similar cohesion can be found in the great work of classical art in different cultures. Hence, the basic assumption for the new paradigm is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul. And being the most advanced geological force in the universe, which proves that the lawfulness of the mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion, and that all evil is the result of a lack of development and therefore can be overcome. A new world economic order is emerging, involving the vast majority of the countries of the global south. The European nations and the United States must not fight this effort, but by joining hands with the developing countries, cooperate to shape the next epoch of development of the human species to become a renaissance of the highest and most noble expressions of creativity. Let us therefore create an international movement of world citizens who work together to shape the next phase in the evolution of mankind, the new epoch. World citizens of all countries unite.
Thank you very much, Helga, for your opening remarks for this conference and for providing the essential overall political and philosophical outline that's required for the kind of discussion that can lead us forward in this situation. We are going to turn next to Mexican Congressman Benjamín Robles Montoya. He has been a federal congressman from the state of Oaxaca since 2018, and he's the National Political Commissioner of the Workers' Party, or PT. He was a senator from 2012 to 2016, and more recently, a number of the economic policy proposals which he made in his capacity as president of the National Association of Economists of Mexico were adopted by the government of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He and former Congresswoman María de los Ángeles Huerta, who you will hear from later this afternoon, jointly issued an open letter to fellow legislators from around the world to join this effort against nuclear war, and they have provided a meeting room in the Mexican Congress to help host the two conferences, the last one and this one, for which we would like to express our very special thanks. Congressman Montoya, the floor is yours.
Desde México hacemos un llamado a las legisladoras y legisladores del mundo.
We make a call from Mexico to legislators of the world to act now to stop the danger of nuclear war. I open this important seminar with these words, in which we seek to use every means at our disposal to halt what could become a nuclear war. I am very pleased to greet once more Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute, my colleague, Maria de los Angeles Huerta, and all of you participating in this seminar of social and political leaders of the world to stop the danger of a world war. Less than a month ago, on October 27th, we held the second seminar in which we participated from the Mexican Senate. At that time, we insisted that unless the current Ukrainian crisis is stopped with a negotiated peace, it could devolve into a nuclear weapons confrontation between Russia, the United States, and NATO. The president of Mexico, Manuel López Obrador, has just reiterated the Mexican position on this matter last November 16th. He did so on the occasion of the recent vote at the General Assembly of the United Nations. He said it is indispensable to open dialogue to attain peace. There is simply no other way out. Mexico shall continue defending its position in favor of peace, of a peaceful solution to this conflict and this confrontation. That is Mexico's position, neutrality. Today, my friends, the strategic situation has become even more dangerous than when we met barely a month ago. The recent incident in Poland shows just how close we've come to the edge of a nuclear war, whether by miscalculation or mistake. And it is of the utmost importance that every nation of this planet raise our voices, not the voice of one nation or of several nations, but of all humanity for peace and against nuclear war. This commitment and publication drove us to address a letter to legislators around the world on the 16th of November. This is an urgent call. We must stop the danger of war. Former Congresswoman Huerta and myself, in this letter, invited our colleagues from around the world to join this effort and to encourage citizens of the world to also join in the development of a new international architecture of development and peace that will guarantee the right to well-being and development of every human being in the world. The new security architecture has to be founded on the acknowledgement that all sovereign nations have valid security concerns, and respecting these does not in any way mean that we are harming the interests of others. But some wish to impose the law of the strongest, as ancient and present empires tend to do, particularly during
Somos 8
Recording in
mil
progress.
millones de seres humanos, pero el Programa Mundial de
billion
Alimentos
of us humans now, but the UN food program tells us that the world faces a food crisis without precedence in history. The General Secretary of the UN, Antonio Guterres, has already stated that if we do not stop these wars, up to 1.7 billion people may face starvation. Meanwhile, financial speculation grows unchecked. The power of banking crushes entire nations trying to pay unpayable debts, and the galloping inflation has become a preamble to the apocalypse. The efforts of some countries to decouple the economies of Russia and China threatens to sink not only the less developed countries, but also Europe in a process of deindustrialization. There cannot be peace, I repeat, without development. The road to peace goes through development, and it's very clear that the victims of this unbridled economic neoliberalism, which has ravaged Mexico over recent years, speaks to the need for a new development structure. Some countries are growing very rapidly in Washington. We see also the BRICS, which is another pathway to this new architecture. These are valid options that merit study and consideration. We feel in Mexico that we have a special role to play in the construction of this new construction of development and peace architecture due to our proximity to the United States and the ups and downs of our bilateral relationship. We do not seek confrontation. We seek economic cooperation for the common good of all nations. It may be this orientation may not please Wall Street, but it will certainly benefit the American people. President López Obrador hit the nail on the head when he visited Washington in July 2020. He quoted the best president Mexico ever had, Benito Juárez, was able to get along with the American president, Abraham Lincoln. Likewise, a similar positive relationship existed between President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and our patriotic President Lázaro Cárdenas. So these understandings can be reached. So in conclusion, dear friends, I would like to make perhaps a somewhat philosophical comment on the role that we have as legislators at a time of existential crisis such as today. We have to legislate for today, but also for the future. We must legislate for our children, for our grandchildren. It is up to us to open the door to human creativity, to come up with new ideas, bold and different solutions to help the citizens of our countries and build a better future, a future of peace, a future of development. That is the essence of our call to legislators and political leaders of the world. Thank you for your attendance and participation in this seminar, and may you all be welcome. As we say in Mexico, this is your home. Thank you for your attention.
Congressman Robles, Montoya, your support for these activities and the role of you and former Congresswoman Maria de Los Angeles Huerta is especially appreciated in driving this entire campaign forward. And we will study your words closely. I believe what we will now do is we will turn to what we have from Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, which were remarks that he made back in 1999 in his famous video, Storm Over Asia, where he takes up the matter of war and how to actually build the peace through development.
What is the fundamental interest of the United States? Is it to find somebody we call an enemy, the way the British do, and go out and say, let's prepare for war against this chosen, designated enemy? Should we go out and pick out official enemies of the United States and stage wars with them, simply to have somebody to shoot at or someone to hate? Is that our policy? We start from scratch and we build an order which is designed to bring peace. Now, as a result of that, Treaty of Westphalia, and the agreement to this principle, we had the emergence of a policy, not a perfect policy, but the emergence of policies which included what became the policies of the United States, what became essentially the policy of community of principle as expressed by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams. So when we have adversaries in the world, we don't go around trying to punish people. We don't go into countries and spank them because we don't like their internal conduct. You don't do that. Only idiots or warmongers do that. It's not allowed. Don't try to legislate morals at the point of a bayonet of invading or occupying troops. That leads to the worst result. And when people say, well, it's a terrible crime, we've got morally offended, we got to go in there and straighten these people out. All you're doing is you're spreading war. You're spreading war that cannot be stopped. Because now the people who are going in to do the punishing are the new criminals. And hatred of those criminals will result in people taking reprisal against them. And when they take reprisals, then the people who are the victims of their taking reprisals will become angry and they will kill too. So the solution to war, as has always been understood by the great strategists of modern European civilization, and also China, is to bring peace. How do you build peace? Well, certain principles. Do we agree that a sovereign nation state is a fundamental human right established by modern European civilization? So the first human right we must agree upon is the sovereignty of the other nation state. If we can agree on that, we've got to start. If we agree that the purpose of treaty relations is to find beneficial, mutually beneficial effects, do we want to promote trade? Do we want to promote the benefits of trade? Do we want to see other nations more secure, more internally secure, with happier people, less likely to get angry and start doing terrible things? Let's find a new way. Let's stop talking about we want to fight for this, we want to fight for that, we want to fight against this. Let's stop that nonsense. Let's say, what is it that we really need? Can't we find a way to cooperate and build peace and build security and build cooperation? Can't we go to others and say, isn't common justice so much in the interest of us all? Haven't we learned our lesson? Isn't it time that we cooperate? Isn't it time that we build a system which is consistent with the interests of us all, as they tried to do in the very difficult negotiations which established the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648? That's what the policy must be.
So we have now heard from Lyndon LaRouche and his remarks from his World Historic video of 1999, Storm Over Asia, as to the actual principles required to deal with a situation like the current one. I believe our video capabilities are back, at least in part, and we are going to continue with our scheduled order of speakers at this point. The next person who will be addressing us is Colonel Richard Black, who headed the Army's Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon for many years, and he also served in the Virginia State Senate from 2012 to 2020. Colonel Black is widely known internationally for his courageous denunciation of the danger of nuclear war and of the genocidal wars waged by the United States over recent decades. His topic today is the danger of nuclear war after the US midterm elections.
The United States and NATO are on a nuclear razor's edge. Article 5 of the diabolical NATO Charter says that an attack on one member is an attack on all 30 nations of NATO. World War III, perhaps thermonuclear war, rests today on a hair trigger. NATO comprises 950 million people with a defense budget that is 20 times Russia's. A single miscalculation can send 1 billion people off to war and precipitate a global nuclear bloodbath. On November 17th, the Washington Post carried this ominous headline: How an anonymous source raised false alarm of Russian strike on Poland. It said the Associated Press had sent a terrifying news alert around the world on Tuesday. Those are the Washington Post words. A terrifying news alert around the world on Tuesday. 2 p.m., the Associated Press wrote, a senior U.S. intelligence official says Russian missiles crossed into NATO member Poland, killing 2 people. The news agency noted that the Polish government had top leaders holding an emergency meeting due to a crisis situation. By the time that the AP took down its initial report, that report had been viewed by thousands of news outlets across the globe, and many of them published wild-eyed headlines based on the erroneous article. Because the errant missile had exploded just inside its border, Polish Foreign Minister Zbigniew Rau summoned the Russian ambassador, demanding immediate detailed explanations. Ukraine's President Zelensky hysterically accused Russia of bombarding Poland, though he must have known at that very moment that a Ukrainian missile had actually caused the blast, not a Russian one. Alone among nations, Ukraine still denies that it fired the missile and blames it on Russia. The anonymous intelligence assessment that blamed Moscow triggered immediate demands for a no-fly zone. The Ukraine holy grail that would embroil American jets in dogfights with Russian pilots and cause us to launch bomb strikes against Russian air defense batteries. World War III would be the almost inevitable result of a no-fly zone. The Independent reported, Biden convenes emergency G7 and NATO meeting after Russian-made rockets strike Poland. The president was awakened after midnight to news of a missile explosion, and he went on Twitter promising that and reaffirming America's ironclad commitment to NATO. Now, in the excitement and panic of the moment, the world media repeated the false Associated Press claims. Fox News cited a senior U.S. official and reports on the ground that a Russian missile had hit Poland. CNN reported that a Russian-made missile was responsible for the blast, and the Daily Mail wrote, Russian bombs killed 2 in Poland. The senior U.S. intelligence official cited by the Associated Press claimed that multiple Russian missiles had crossed into Poland. But even Poland's official statement said there was just a single missile. So why would U.S. intelligence purposefully exaggerate the facts? Why would top NATO officials be called into an emergency nighttime meeting to respond to an obvious missile malfunction, regardless of whether it came from Russia or Ukraine? Does any sentient person that Russians would choose to attack Poland with a single missile by targeting an old grain silo in a tiny farm village of 500 people? Will some event so trivial become the eventual tripwire for global nuclear conflict? This incident proves that NATO is fully primed for a 1914 moment, when the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife sparked a war that killed 18 million Europeans and led to World War II, which killed another 50 million. The next war that we face could kill billions of women and children, men, women, and children, ending civilization as we know it. Is an explosion that kills 2 farmers and destroys a grain silo worth all of that. Now, we can have peace in Ukraine and draw back from World War III whenever we choose to do so. But so far, the US and UK have repeatedly blocked peace talks to end the hostilities. Back in 2014, the Minsk peace accords were signed, ending Ukraine's war against the Donbass. However, America flooded Ukraine with a huge weapons buildup and incentivized the Ukraine's new revolutionary junta to renege on its promises and continue the bloody war against the Russian-speaking border regions that had declared independence. America blocked peace from taking hold. Again, in April 2022, just 2 months after Russia entered the war on the side of Donbass, Ukrainian President Zelensky sent a 5-page peace proposal to Russia. Russia found the proposal to be an acceptable framework for ending the fighting. President Putin backed peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, and the sides had almost arrived at a satisfactory resolution of hostilities. The Ukrainian peace negotiator, David Arakhamia, even told Ukrainian television that, and this is a quote, "The Russian Federation has given an official answer to all positions, which is that they are willing to accept the Ukrainian position, except for the issue of Crimea." But as the peace talks were proceeding smoothly, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson unexpectedly flew to Kiev and blocked them from going further. He could never have done this without White House approval. Now, at that very early stage of the war, casualties were relatively light and property damage was quite limited. Undoubtedly, 100,000 lives could have been saved if the United States had been willing to allow peace to emerge, a peace agreed to by the two parties to the war. The only reason the war continued is that the US and the UK ordered Ukraine to fight on. Now, again, just recently, on November the 9th, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, told the Economic Club of New York that a victory by Ukraine may not be achieved militarily. He said that winter could provide an opportunity to begin negotiations with Russia. However, the administration was shocked by Milley's discussion of peace, and they went into damage control, assuring Ukraine that the pause in winter fighting was no reason to discuss peace, and that Washington looks forward to supporting Ukraine's next advances and its future bloodshed on the battlefield. Once again, the U.S. has blocked peace and promoted death and destruction. In 2014, the CIA and British MI6 helped to overthrow the legitimate government of Ukraine and install a revolutionary junta. This is what began the current war in Ukraine. It wasn't started by Russia. It was started in 2014 by the CIA and British MI6. The junta, which took over, launched a campaign of hate-filled de-Russification that inspired the independence movements in the Donbass Republic of Donetsk and Lugansk, where people's language, their culture, their job security, and literally their physical safety were threatened by the revolutionary junta put in place by the United States and Great Britain by overthrowing the elected government of Ukraine in 2014. Throughout the years, Russia has patiently and consistently sought peaceful resolutions to the conflict. The US, UK, and NATO have blocked all of these peace overtures and doggedly pursued the path of war, bloodshed, and destruction. The US and NATO have violently opposed democratic self-determination for the Russian-speaking peoples of the Donbass along the border of Russia. When Elon Musk proposed UN-supervised elections to determine whether Russian-speaking regions would join Russia or return to Ukraine, Zelensky was furious. He knows that given a choice, the people of those regions would, once again, vote overwhelmingly to join Russia. Americans must come to understand it is our government and not Russia that insist on continuing the war. We must come to grips with the mortal danger that the Ukraine war and our NATO alliances pose for the US and for the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Richard Black. And we thank you again for your leadership, for your courage in providing for the world a sense of what the true United States actually is. Our next speaker is Stephen Starr. He is Assistant Clinical Professor and former Clinical Laboratory Science Program Director at the University of Missouri. He's an associate member of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and he is a leading expert on nuclear warfare, including publishing articles on this subject in such places as the Federation of Atomic Scientists. His remarks today are on what would happen if a nuclear war started in the Black Sea. Mr. Starr.
Thank you for having me at this event. It's an honor to be here with everyone. I teach a class on nuclear weapons at the University of Missouri, and I found that very few of the students understand what a nuclear weapon is. This is because the American public schools don't teach about this subject. So I want to begin by discussing what a nuclear weapon is and how much different it is than what we consider conventional weapons. The largest weapon that currently in the US nuclear arsenal is called the mother of all bombs. And it has 11 tons of TNT explosive power. A ton is 2,000 pounds, so that's 22,000 pounds of TNT. If you convert that to kilotons, kilo means 1,000, so 1,000 tons, that's 1/100th of a kiloton. It's a pretty big weapon, but compared to the Hiroshima bomb, it's about 1,000 times smaller. 15,000 tons of TNT is the equivalent of 30 million pounds of TNT, or 15 kilotons. But explosive power is only one way to describe the difference between conventional and nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapon is like a piece of the sun. When it explodes, the fireball that it creates, the surface of the fireball is hotter than the surface of the sun. So anyone close to it's going to be vaporized, and it will ignite fires over large distances. This is what Hiroshima looked like before the bomb went off. This is what it looked like afterwards. About 4 to 5 square miles of Hiroshima were ignited into a giant nuclear firestorm, and it burned everything. These firestorms actually release more energy than the nuclear weapon does. So we've gone a long way from atomic bombs, but the US still has atomic bombs. They're called tactical nuclear weapons. That's that's not a very precise definition, but the US B-61 has a variable range of explosive power. And it can explode, they call it a dial-a-yield weapon. So the pilot can set the explosive power anywhere from 0.3 of a kiloton to 50 kilotons. Now, 0.3 of a kiloton is 50 times smaller than the Hiroshima bomb. It's equal to 300 tons of TNT. They developed this because the military wanted a usable nuclear weapon. So these bombs are too big. We want one we can use. So what this does is it blurs the distinction between nuclear and conventional weapons. And it's very dangerous because field commanders are going to be a lot more likely to use a weapon like this in a situation where war breaks out and they're losing. The US has about 100 B-61s at NATO bases right now. This map shows where they're located, the red dots. There's 5 different nations, Belgium, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and Turkey. The black squares show where the planes are that can carry them. It's actually a violation of the spirit of the NPT to have shared nuclear weapons with other nations, but the U.S. uses a technicality to get around that. The U.S. also has ballistic missile launching sites in Poland and Romania. It's called Aegis Ashore. The Aegis systems are on ships, but these sites are 800 to 1,000 miles away from Moscow. So Russia considers them quite a danger. You know, if the U.S. had Russian missile sites 800 miles away from Washington, D.C., I think we would be worried about it here. Aegis Ashore uses a Mk-41 missile launcher. It's a dual-use launcher. It can also launch Tomahawk cruise missiles. This is a sheet from the Lockheed Martin sales brochure. You can see there's a Tomahawk missile listed as under strike warfare. For ballistic missile defense, there's an SM-3 that's supposed to be an interceptor missile. Although I think it's possible you could substitute a nuclear warhead on there. Well, the Mk-41 vertical launch system, the missiles are loaded in closed containers, and Russia is unable to verify the missile type. It was actually a violation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty to put these in Poland and Romania, but the U.S. has abrogated that treaty now. Well, today, we don't just have atomic bombs, we have strategic nuclear weapons, and they are usually 7 to 87 times more powerful than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. This picture here is taken of a thermonuclear weapon test in the South Pacific the U.S. had. The picture is taken about 50 miles away. There are weapons even larger than that now. Russia's got a Poseidon nuclear drone torpedo, which has a 100 megaton warhead. Well, that's what they announced initially, or was released. The U.S. has said it's 2 megatons, but I know for a fact that there were 100 megaton warheads back in the Cold War. So this drone torpedo can go 115 miles per hour. It has basically unlimited range because it has a nuclear reactor for a power source, and travel 1,000 feet below the surface. And if it detonates, if this detonated on land, it would create a firestorm covering 1,200 square miles. Underneath the ocean, it will blast, it will vaporize a huge amount of water. It would create a radioactive tidal wave. If you salt it with cobalt, you can make it radioactive. It would create a tidal wave like 1,000 feet high, traveling hundreds of miles an hour. It would inundate coastal areas for miles inland. This is a video of the nuclear weapons test the U.S. had in the South Pacific. It's a 15 megaton bomb. That image is 15 miles away. No, I'm 50 miles away, and these palm trees are being ignited from the heat from the fireball. They're far enough away that the blast wave hasn't hit them yet. This is a lot bigger than an atomic bomb at Hiroshima. You see the blast wave spreading outward to that circle there, to the ocean. Trees are burning and blast wave approaches. It strikes them and blows them apart. Blast wave travels at hundreds of miles an hour. So this is a thermonuclear weapon. This is what we're worried about now with Russia and the United States. In 5 to 15 minutes, the U.S. and Russia can launch 800 to 1,000 of these types of warheads. Sorry, my computer's hanging up here. Oh, come on. All right, sorry. The intercontinental ballistic missiles can take 30 minutes time to go from the U.S. to Russia, from Russia to the U.S. If you park a submarine off the coast, if you park a submarine off the coast of Russia or the U.S., it can hit a target in as little as 7 to 10 minutes. Well, that doesn't give very much time to make decisions. If you see one of those coming in on radar, it takes 2 to 3 minutes to detect the attack with early warning systems. 30 seconds, as little as 30 seconds to decide what to do, and 5 minutes to launch. This is a sequence that would be in the United States, 3 minutes to detect and confirm attack. NORAD's supposed to do that. That's their requirement. There's a 30-second conference call with the president. It could be longer, possibly with intercontinental ballistic missiles, but it could be as short as 30 seconds. The president orders a nuclear attack. 2 to 3 minutes to give and transmit the launch order, and it takes 2 minutes for the ICBM launch to occur. For submarines, it would take 15 minutes. If the warning of attack was false, it would start a nuclear war. Currently, the US and Russia have huge nuclear arsenals. We have reduced them quite a bit from the 1980s, but currently Russia has about 6,200 nuclear weapons. The red areas at the bottom of those graphs show that those are the operational and deployed weapons. Russia has 1,600 of them. The US has about 5,650 nuclear weapons in total. 1,700 of those are deployed and operational. So in total, the US and Russia have 11,900 nuclear weapons. And compare this, the other nuclear weapon states have 798 nuclear weapons. So you can see where the arsenals are. It's nuclear disarmament has always had to start with the US and Russia. Both the US and Russia employ launch on warning policy. So a retaliatory nuclear strike is launched when early warning systems detect enemy nuclear attack. The retaliatory strike is launched while the enemy missiles are still in the air and before any nuclear detonation occurs. A false warning of attack believed to be true would make the retaliatory strike a nuclear first strike. The US and Russia are always watching. This is an image of the NORAD center. All the screens are up, looking for the missiles coming in. Russia has a similar center. And once the missiles are launched, they cannot be recalled. This is a scenario sometime later this winter. In Ukraine, NATO intervenes and war between Russia and the United States begins. Retaliation for a US cruise missile strike against Russian forces, Russia fires a missile and sinks a US guided missile cruiser in the Black Sea. 2 US aircraft take off carrying B-61 nuclear gravity bombs. Nuclear detonations sink Russian ships in the Black Sea. Russia retaliates by hitting NATO targets throughout Europe with nuclear weapons. The US launches a massive nuclear strike against Russia. Russian early warning systems detect the US launch, and Russia launches a massive nuclear strike against the US and Europe. More than 3,000 nuclear detonations occur in 1 hour. Nuclear firestorms incinerate all the major cities of Europe, the United States, and Russia. The massive nuclear firestorms cover hundreds of thousands of square miles. Everything remotely flammable burns in the fire zones. 150 million tons of soot and smoke created by the firestorms rapidly rises above cloud level into the stratosphere. The smoke spreads around the Earth and forms a global stratospheric smoke layer. The smoke will block warming sunlight from reaching the Earth's surface. 70% of sunlight is blocked in the northern hemisphere and 35% is blocked in the southern hemisphere. Because it can't be rained out in the stratosphere, the smoke layer will remain there for at least 10 years. The loss of warming sunlight creates ice age weather conditions around the Earth. The temperatures fall below freezing every day for the next 3 years. Ice age weather prevents food crops from being grown for 10 years. Most humans and other land animals will starve to death. This is a mass extinction event. This image shows a farmer in a barren field looking up at a cloudless sky. That's the sun. I read that the sun would look like the moon, a full moon at midnight. So who won this war? If you all have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you very much, Professor Starr. I don't know about the rest of you, but that's about as terrifying as it gets. I would like to, at this point, turn the microphone over to my co-host, Stefan Ossenkopf from Germany, who will proceed with the next part of our conference presentations. Stefan?
Yes, I'm here. Can I be heard?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Dennis. I welcome everyone to this third seminar of political and social leaders of the world. Because of we have resolved some technical issues, I think we have now acquired more audiences. So you're watching a seminar by the Schiller Institute called Stop the Danger of Nuclear War, and listening to panel 1, Stopping the Doomsday Clock, Common Good of the One Humanity. My name is Stefan Ossenkopf. I'm in Berlin, Germany. The situation in Germany is heating up markedly, not only in Germany, but beyond in Europe. The German government has become and is increasingly a war party in the proxy war between NATO and Russia. We're sending weapons continuously. We're training Ukrainian soldiers. We're maintaining a confrontational posture without seeking any compromise. And thus we're fueling the danger of world war. And so it's very fitting that Professor Starr has given us a very chilling account of what World War III would actually look like. Now, there are peace protests and a lot of initiatives also coming from Germany now. They might have not been visible, but they are now becoming more visible, scattered still, but they are forming alliances. They demand peace negotiations, an end to the Ukraine conflict, an end also especially to the economic warfare that's been conducted against Russia. The sanctions have also a devastating effect on Germany, on Europe, and globally. So they demand a return to an economic system of the common good and international cooperation. We have a lot of cities and municipalities, citizens and businesses that are experiencing shocking energy price hikes, the dysfunctionality of democratic processes, and an unprecedented financial crisis. So that gives us the opportunity to bring some of the leaders of the peace protests and peace initiatives to this conference. And we're very happy and fortunate to have some of them either live or giving us presentations. We will begin with Karl Krökel. He is the headmaster of the Metal Guild of a city called Dessau-Roßlau, and he is a graduate engineer who studied finance and mechanical engineering, but he is self-employed as a machine tool businessman for over 30 years. He has founded the Craftsmen for Peace. He has organized demonstrations with thousands of participants with the central demand of ending arms deliveries to Ukraine and stopping sanctions against Russia. And Karl Krökel's presentation is called The Role of Artisans for Understanding Among Peoples.
Hallo und viele Grüße aus Deutschland. Heute gehe ich nicht auf die aktuellen Fragen ein, wie die Gefahr eines Nuklearkrieges, das in den kommenden Monaten Millionen Menschen in Deutschland verarmen und 100.000 Betrieben der Bankrott droht, das bankrotte neoliberale System, die Deindustrialisierung Deutschlands, die Autorenschaft des Sabotageaktes Nord Stream. Ich werde als Kreishandwerksmeister immer wieder gefragt, warum ausgerechnet wir Handwerker uns solchen Fragen widmen wie Friedenspolitik, gegen Sanktionen, gegen Waffenlieferungen. Oder dass wir Handwerker den Weg unterstützen, uns in aktive Bürger der Welt, in eine Bewegung von Weltbürgern entwickeln müssen. Vor allem, dass wir fordern, dass kollektive Handeln zu einer Kraft werden muss, die bestehende Sicherheitsarchitektur neu ausrichtet? Die Antwort leitet sich aus der langen Geschichte und Tradition des Handwerks ab. Das Handwerk denkt in Generationen und erwartet das eigentlich auch von der Politik. Es schafft Werte und Wachstum, es gibt ökologische und soziale Impulse und es sichert Arbeitsplätze und Wohlstand. Für das Handwerk, aber auch für die Gesellschaft insgesamt ist Frieden also die wichtigste Rahmenbedingung. Auch leistet das Handwerk über all diese Generationen einen wesentlichen Beitrag zur Völkerverständigung. Das geht Jahrhunderte zurück. Zum Beispiel die Pflicht zur Wanderschaft war Voraussetzung für eine Zulassung zur Meisterprüfung und Teil des vorgeschriebenen Ausbildungsweges. Es sollten neue Arbeitspraktiken fremder Orte, Regionen und Länder kennengelernt werden, meist über 6 Jahre. Einen nicht geringen Einfluss auf die gewählten Ziele hatten dabei die Sprachgrenzen, die Religion, die bereits bestehenden Migrationsnetzwerke. Die europäischen Auswirkungen auf den Wissenstransfer waren enorm. Zur Erinnerung, von Peter dem Großen bis zum Ende der Kanzlerschaft Bismarcks gab es eine deutsch-russische Allianz. Damals sind Hunderttausende Deutsche nach Russland ausgewandert, haben dort Handelsbeziehungen geknüpft. 3-mal waren Deutsche in Russland Kanzler und fast in jeder russischen Regierung waren Deutsche als Minister vertreten. Es waren Deutsche, die die Akademie für Wissenschaft in Russland aufgebaut haben und neue Technologien und Handwerkstechniken nach Russland einführten. Es waren Deutsche, die die neu gegründete russische Hauptstadt St. Petersburg mit aufgebaut haben. Das sind die Sphären, in denen wir als Handwerker denken und handeln. Wissen, Wollen, Können, Ehrlichkeit, Verlässlichkeit, Liebe zum Beruf, Stolz auf das Geschaffene, Menschlichkeit, Gleichberechtigung. Nicht Lügen, Gier, Krieg, Finanzblasen, Unterdrückung und verloren gegangene Diskussionskultur. Die Hinwendung Europas nach Osten stellt also die historische Norm dar, nicht die 70-jährige Präsenz der USA, deren Informationskrieg gegen Russland vor allem den Zweck hat, die Europäer ihre Geschichte vergessen zu lassen. Wir Handwerker vergessen aber unsere Geschichte nicht. Wir wissen, wo wir herkommen und wollen nicht, dass das Werk von Generationen einfach verschleudert wird und wir Hals über Kopf in amerikanische Hände werfen. Wir wollen den Krieg in der Ukraine zum Anlass nehmen, alles zu überdenken, was in den letzten Jahrzehnten in der gesamten Welt schiefgelaufen ist. Gerade als ehemaliger DDR-Bürger haben wir nach 1989 die vielen Möglichkeiten einer kooperativen, partnerschaftlichen Ordnung gesehen. Es wäre zu diesem Zeitpunkt vielleicht sogar möglich gewesen, zu einer gemeinsamen Neukonzeption eines Zivilisations- und Wirtschaftsmodells zu gelangen und auf Russland zuzugehen. Denn Deutschland verdankt seine Wiedervereinigung in erster Linie der Sowjetunion. Von allen 4 Siegermächten war es vor allem die Sowjetunion, die 1989 die Möglichkeiten einer deutschen Wiedervereinigung immer wieder ins Gespräch brachte. Frankreich und Großbritannien lehnten dieses Ansinnen rundherum ab. Auch für die Amerikaner kam die Wiedervereinigung nur unter der Bedingung zustande, dass das vereinigte Deutschland Teil der NATO werden würde. Die Russen kamen den Amerikanern entgegen, verzichteten auf ihr Ziel eines neutralen Deutschlands und ermöglichten so die Wiedervereinigung. Was die USA daraus gemacht haben, sehen wir als Handwerker mit Beschämung. Nichts wäre dringlicher, als eine Zäsur vorzubereiten, die Europa wieder seinen Zielen von 1989 zurückbringt und alle europäischen Länder aus der NATO austreten. Der eurasische Kontinent ist das Herz der Welt. Dort sind 2/3 der Bodenschätze und 2/3 der Weltbevölkerung beheimatet. Das wiederzufinden und aufzubauen, ist jetzt unsere Aufgabe, was die USA verhindern wollen. Deswegen rufe ich die Handwerker aller 5 Kontinente auf, sich der Bewegung Handwerker für den Frieden anzuschließen, als großer Teil der Bewegung von Weltbürgern zu werden, was die einzige Möglichkeit ist, das Chaos zu stoppen. Mit handwerklichem Gruß, euer Kreishandwerksmeister Karl Krökel. Bis zum nächsten Mal.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karl Krökel, for this excellent presentation. We're going to continue further to Sister Ortrud Fürst, sister, because she is a member of the Dominican order, a missionary. Her presentation has the name Thoughts on Current World Affairs, and she's a supporter of the Schiller Institute for quite a number of years. She will introduce herself in the beginning, so I'll stop it here and let the presentation run.
I'm Sister Ortrud Fürst. I come from Württemberg in Aalen and joined the missionary Dominican sisters in Schledorf in 1963. Originally, I wanted to go to South Africa to the mission, but an illness held me back. And besides, I was needed in the administration because I came from the administrative side. Later, I was called to Munich to work with the homeless. First in a women's house that we founded, and later in a house for men and women. It could be, after all, that the governments of all countries are concerned with humanity, mindfulness, justice, and truth. That swords will be turned into plowshares, and that all nuclear weapons on Earth are disposed of. That the longing of so many people for liberation, love, and peace finds fulfillment. That all enemy images must die, and that all the religions respect each other as sisters and brothers. It could be, after all, that the people on our earth may experience how beautiful it is to share with each other and to take care of your creation. Then we will experience that you, living God, are very close to us all the days of our lives until the great encounter with you. It could be that this is true. Thoughts on the present world situation. On that subject, many competent and also war-experienced politicians, military officers, scientists, and peace researchers have already taken a stand. They are very worried about the threatening escalation of warfare, especially now in the proxy war in Ukraine between the USA, NATO, and Russia, and see an approaching further world war, even a nuclear war looming on the horizon. There have been several mediation efforts of the conflict parties in different places of the world, which always contained negotiable results for pacification of the war and gave hope, especially the Minsk agreements. But then everything suddenly collapsed again. The reasons for that became clear only later, after documents and statements became known, which showed that already before the negotiations there would be not any agreement, or that suddenly acts of sabotage were attributed to each other. It is well known that truth dies first in a war and propaganda flourishes. This game has been tried so often that we see through it more rapidly today than in earlier decades, thanks to some media which are committed to the truth, or at least to some kind of reality. It is downright scandalous that vast sums of money can suddenly be spent for warfare, although the poverty of many peoples and nations of the world cries out to heaven, while these nations are exploited and kept down by the so-called powerful states in several respects. Also in Europe, poverty spreads rapidly, often due to political measures. The middle class fights for its survival, likewise also larger enterprises, not to mention small enterprises, which disappear almost silently. Especially the German, but also the European economies are the focus of attack, which is to be damaged, among other things, by the fact that it has led into an energy shortage and thus led into ruin. Given this anti-human and anti-ethnic approach, the golden rule of the world religions came to my mind, which expressed in the following peaceful thoughts. The golden rule in Christianity. All things, whatever ye would, that men would do to you, do ye even do to them. Matthew 7:12 and Luke 6:31. In Judaism, do not do to others what you do not want them to do to you. Rabbi Hillel. In Buddhism, a state that is not pleasant or pleasing to me, neither shall be to him. Samyutta Nikaya. Chinese religion. What you do not wish for yourself, do not do to other people. Confucius. Islam. None of you is a believer unless he wishes for his brother what he wishes for himself. Sayings of Muhammad. All spiritual beings from all these religions and beyond, who are concerned with the creation, and all people who look with gratitude at this wonderful earth of ours and rejoice in it, are invited to bring about what is possible for them, so that this wonderful world of creation may continue to exist for the joy of mankind.
Thank you so much, Sister Fürst, for this inspirational presentation. We will go to the next speaker who will join us live. And this is Dr. Andreas Uhlich, retired managing director of a company. He began to build an alliance of organizations and citizens in the city of Dresden to stop the war in Ukraine and the policy of confrontation. The alliance he has founded bears the name Citizens Initiative Peace Negotiations Now, and his presentation is also called Peace Negotiations Now. Please, Dr. Uhlich.
Good morning and good afternoon, dear friends. My name is Andreas Uhlich. I am a co-organizer of a peace group in Dresden. Our group includes activists from the Dresden Peace Vigil, the Association of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, members of the BÜSO Civil Rights Movement Solidarity, and the party Die Linke. We are in the process of organizing a rally for November 26 under the slogan Peace Negotiations Now. This is currently the most urgent demand to end the war in Ukraine. Diplomacy must once again do justice to its task. With good reason, it was standard practice in past years not to send weapons to crisis and war zones. The NATO states have completely abandoned this principle. They want us to believe that weapons shorten the war. Does NATO want to shorten the war from 1 year to half a year? That has not happened. To how many years do they want to shorten it? What will the country look like then? Where is this policy heading? In reality, the war is being prolonged. More and more people are dying on both sides. More weapons increase the risk of further escalation. We demand that our governments be consistent and forceful in their commitment to peace negotiations. Not to do so is reckless, also towards the Ukrainian people and at best serves the arms industry and interests of US geopolitics, which want to maintain their unipolar world order. The training of Ukrainian military personnel in Western Europe also makes us de facto participants in the war. The consequences are incalculable. The impact of a Ukrainian missile in Poland a few days ago showed how quickly false accusations can lead to the brink of a world war. But the war has already reached us as an economic war. In several waves of sanctions, which began even before February 24th, the prosperity of European countries is being put at risk, and peoples in the third world are being driven into hunger because of the lack of grain and fertilizer supplies from Russia and Ukraine. It is said that the sanctions are intended to force Russia to end the war. Indeed, the German government admitted on November 8th that it has no knowledge of any concrete impact of the sanctions on the Russian government's decisions regarding warfare in Ukraine. And EU states apparently have no plan for whether and to what extent sanctions will be lifted once the war is over. In fact, the sanctions are aimed at ruining Russia, but here in our home countries, they are fueling inflation. Mention are protesting massive increases in energy prices. A report on the economy in the Saxony region says, quote, "The mood in commerce is at rock bottom. Companies have their backs to the wall. Some companies are plagued by existential fears," quote end. That's why we demand a stop to all sanctions, economic and financial blockades from which people around the world are suffering. Sanctions do not end wars. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Uhlich. And we're going to the next speaker, which will be Scott Ritter, who's a former US Marine Corps intelligence officer, who served in the former Soviet Union, implementing arms control treaties, and also a former United Nations weapons inspector. Before I give you the floor, Scott, I would like to direct the attention of the audience to an interview that you gave to a German platform in English, but it's a German media platform called Gegenpol on November 18th. And this presentation or interview is has the headline "German Politics on Course for Destruction." We all watched it, and it's a really, Scott, you're not mincing words about the German economy, about the danger of war, etc. So we from the Schiller Institute are urging the audience now to really watch it. We can share the link, I'm sure. Otherwise, just Google it, Gegenpol, which is Gegenpol, Scott Ritter of November 18th. Because I think this is exactly the kick in the rear or the wake-up call that the Germans need, and also the people beyond. But Scott, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for asking me to speak. It's a privilege. We'll just start off about talking about Germany and the current situation as it involves the recent missile attack against Polish territory. If you listen to the German government, they've said, we have not overreacted. We aren't looking for a conflict with Russia. We're seeking to avoid an escalation of tensions between Russia and NATO. The last thing we want is a NATO-Russian conflict. I have to say that this is absurd in the extreme when you take a look at the actual what Germany has done. Yes, Germany did not invoke, or at least support the invocation of Article 4 gathering by NATO in response to this attack, rightfully noting that this wasn't a Russian attack on Poland, but what they call an errant Ukrainian missile. But they continue to blame Russia. They say that this war would not have happened
if it weren't for Russia invading Ukraine to begin with, as if Germany didn't play a role in setting up the conditions that led to the Russian decision to invade. If Germany wasn't part of what was called the Normandy format, Germany and France, who together with Ukraine negotiated the Minsk II Accords, which were supposed to provide a diplomatic off-ramp from conflict, if only Ukraine would have implemented these accords. What did Germany do from 2015 to 2022 to see that these accords were implemented? It appears that Germany actually was working with Ukraine to prevent the implementation of these accords. That's according to former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, who said that the Minsk Accords was a sham. All it was designed to do is buy time so that the Ukrainian military could be trained by NATO to be able to, through use of force, resolve the Donbass question. The Donbass question, of course, being Lugansk, Donetsk, and what their status would be. The Minsk Accords were supposed to keep them as part of Ukraine, respect the territorial integrity, but provide some sort of political autonomy for the ethnic Russian population of that territory so that they could speak their language and embrace their religion and pursue their culture without fear of prosecution or persecution. Where was Germany while the Ukrainians were using the Minsk Accords as a shield? Germany was training Ukrainian troops, so Germany apparently knew exactly what it was doing. Now we take a look at today, now that the conflict has started. It's not a conflict that Russia started, NATO started, expanding their border up to Ukraine. Where was Germany in every discussion about NATO expansion? Where was Germany when they were saying, that everybody knew that if you try and strip Ukraine away from the Russian sphere of influence, that this could lead to a Russian military action? Germany can't claim to be ignorant on this. They're a member of NATO. They sat with the 2008 Bucharest Convention that invited Ukraine, and they understand the response that Russia gave that was articulated by none other than the U.S. ambassador to Russia, William Burns, who in February 2009 published a memorandum called Niet means Niet, no means no. Russia won't tolerate losing Ukraine. Burns warned that if they continue to pursue this policy of NATO expansion into Ukraine, that the end result will be a Russian military response that will cause Ukraine to lose Crimea and Donbass. This was written in February 2009. But Germany can't claim they didn't know what the consequences of their actions were. They knew, everybody knew, and they did it nonetheless. And now we take a look at what happened in Poland. Germany says we don't want to create a conflict. Then why is Germany sending 2 Patriot batteries to the Ukrainian border? Why? First of all, the idea of German troops going into Poland to confront Russia should send anybody with any common sense and understanding of history insane. Germany should never send troops to Poland. Germany should have no interest in Poland. Germany has lost the right to be interested in Poland because of their history. I'm sorry, but now you're sending missile batteries to the Polish-Ukrainian border. For what purpose? You say you don't want a no-fly zone. Then why are you putting missile batteries on the border whose umbrella of coverage extends into Ukraine? You're creating the conditions for a de facto no-fly zone, creating the very conflict that you say you don't want to embrace, or you don't want to go down that path. I have trouble with Germany today. Germany is literally engaged in policies that have no other outcome other than conflict with Russia, while ignoring the fact that Russia has not attacked them. You know who has attacked them? The United States. Ask yourselves, Germans, who attacked Nord Stream 1? Who attacked Nord Stream 2? Who is strangling the German economy by preventing you from buying cheap, affordable, sustainable Russian gas, insisting that instead you buy expensive U.S. liquid natural gas that's bankrupting your society, bankrupting your economy? It's not Russia's fault that Germany's facing the problems that they're facing today. It's America's fault and Germany's fault for not recognizing this. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. If there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them.
Thank you. We'll continue to a couple of more presentations before the Q&A section comes on, but thank you very much for the clear words, Scott. There's a clear divide between the position of the German government and the narrative, so-called, of the German media on the one hand, and what the citizens are experiencing and what they want on the other hand. And I'm very happy to present an initiative by the city of Stralsund, which in late October launched initiative to urge peace talks on Ukraine, including the mayor of the city of Stralsund, wrote an open letter called a new Stralsund peace to the federal government in Berlin. And this letter and initiative makes a reference to an important peace treaty signed in the city in the year 1370, which put an end to a long series of wars in the Baltic Sea region. There were two, so unfortunately the representatives of Stralsund cannot be on today, but they have told us they would join us for some future seminar. But this made international headlines in the way that two mayors of French cities became signatories to that appeal and sent their greetings and their support. Two of these mayors by French cities we will get a presentation by in a few minutes. The first is Patrice Kind, the mayor of Chidrac, which is a town in the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region with 535 inhabitants. And the second mayor is Patrick Gombeau, the mayor of Villapré-le-Petit, and it's located in the northeast of France with 126 inhabitants. It might be small places, but they are about to write history, and they have been mobilizing to find more signatories among French towns. And today I was told that they have now 19 signatories of mayors of France to this appeal by the city of Stralsund. So although the representatives from Germany cannot be on today, they say they feel equally represented by the French mayors, who will now give their presentation called Support of French Mayors for the Stralsund Call for Peace.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all of you. Following the call of the mayor of Stralsund, which I find necessary to have peace and avoid all the problems, I would like to add why I am responding entirely to this call from Stralsund with my following positions. Even if one does not accept the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, it is necessary to analyze how this state of affairs came about. It seems obvious that the United States has long been pursuing two objectives in Europe: to weaken Europe and make it dependent on the United States, and to put Europe in the front line in order to prevent Russia, among others, from becoming a competing power. The position of Europe and of France in particular, with its alignment with the American war machine called NATO, does not allow us to act for peace with other countries. It is therefore urgent, for the interest of the Ukrainian and Russian populations and for the interest of the world, that this war stops. Negotiation remain the only way to stop the spiral of war, both present and future, where the people are always the losers. It is always difficult to express oneself on a subject that one does not master perfectly. However, one thing is clear. Many possibilities to obtain a peaceful solution to this European conflict have been neglected, even before the outbreak of hostilities. Diplomatic activity has not been the favored voice. It is time for all leaders to take stock of the situation and to avoid a totally irreversible situation. My thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. I have no doubt that they would have preferred a demilitarized, neutral Ukraine, a prosperous, free and harmonious union instead of exodus, drama and destruction. Let us have a strong will to replace weapons with diplomacy. And so I salute here the initiative of the city of Stralsund in Germany for this will for peace. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to the two mayors from France. We have a final presentation in the section that I'm going to moderate, and then Dennis is going to take over for more presentations from Latin America, Argentina, Brazil, Peru, etc. The presentation is from Antonio Ingroia, and he is from Italy, a very famous anti-mafia prosecutor from Sicily. He worked with well-known judges, Giovanni Falcone and Paulo Borsellino, who were tragically assassinated by the mafia. He was a candidate for Prime Minister of Italy in 2013 for the Azione Civile slate of candidates.
Stefan, I believe your microphone is muted.
I'm sorry, did you hear anything I said?
You began to describe Judge Ingroia.
Okay, sorry, something intervened technically, but
okay.
I just said that he worked with some famous judges who were tragically assassinated by the mafia. Mr. Ingroia is an anti-mafia prosecutor who was politically active by running for Prime Minister of Italy in 2013 for the Azione Civile slate of candidates, and then again recently in the national elections for the Sovereign and Popular Italy platform, which is fighting for peace and for an exit from NATO. He also had engagements with the United Nations fighting against drugs and organized crime. So, Mr. Ingroia, we're looking forward to your presentation, which is called Italy and Europe are on the front line in the danger of a nuclear war.
Good afternoon to all our friends who are connected to this very important meeting for peace in the world. I am Italian, and I believe that we face a very grave threat right now in the world, in which the entire human race is at risk. So what is needed is an effort, a very big effort, a political, moral, cultural, and ethical effort, we could say, because all of the world's people are together facing this threat, this danger of the end of the human species. Very possibly, very probably, a nuclear war is the greatest, worst catastrophe that we can see in our future. Thus, as an Italian and a citizen of the world, as a political and someone involved in seeking the best future for us all, I believe that we need unity and dialogue among all of us, a world dialogue of the most responsible parties to confront this threat. Italy and Europe are on the front lines facing this danger, but the entire world is in danger. A meeting or meetings such as these are very important to pressure world leaders to choose a way forward or the best pathway to achieve peace for all citizens. This is no time for one or another country to exert its supremacy or its imperialism in the world. This is the time to think of the future of all humanity. I believe that we all have to do everything we can, and we can do a lot. I truly believe that nations that are united can do a great deal. The force of a united people cannot be stopped. Thus, our mission is to build a universal alliance, a world alliance against war, against the spirit of war, and build a real and lasting peace in the interest of the nations of the entire world. I'm here in Italy, but I can be with our friends in Latin America. I believe Latin America is a very important place from which to send a very strong message to all of the leaders of the most powerful nations to really change the direction away from their tragic spirit of war that we must replace with a spirit of peace. Thanks to you all, and let's proceed. I am here, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Ingroia. What better way to transition into the next part of our program than an Italian magistrate speaking Spanish, interpreted into English and French and German, and addressing the issues which are universal in their nature and in their character. The next part of our discussion is from a very prominent group of 4 Latin Americans, Ibero-Americans. In Ibero-America, which has over the recent decades, in fact, been very much subjugated to the policies coming from what's called the Washington Consensus, which are the economic policies of the City of London and Wall Street, by and large expressed through the government of the United States, with some exceptions. There has been a reluctance to wander very far from the established accepted path on economic policies. That is changing. And I think you're going to see that in vivid color in the next discussions. That approach is changing. You have the countries of the entire region looking to the developments that are going on in Asia in particular, and in the third world countries in general, the new spirit of the non-aligned, the spirit of Bandung, looking for an alternative to the collapsing transatlantic financial system, which has now brought upon the world such incredible devastation that the very existence and survival of these nations are at stake. Added to that, you have the criminal and insane sanctions policy, which you've just heard, the incredible damage and responses that we've had from Europe on this thing. And so this part of the world also is moving in a new direction. And that is the subject of our entire exchange today. Our deliberation is, what are those necessary policy alternatives? What has been going on, and where do we go next? I would like to encourage people to send any questions that you may have for any of the panelists on this part of the program to questions@schillerinstitute.org. And those questions will be forwarded to the appropriate people, and Stefan and I will be able to go through them and ask them of whatever panelists you indicate in your questions. Our next speaker is Julio Devido. Mr. DeVito was Argentina's Minister of Federal Planning, Public Investment and Services for 12 years, from 2003 to 2015, during the governments of both Nestor Kirchner and Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, governments that were both hated and feared by the City of London and Wall Street because of their commitment to high technology economic development in cooperation with other nations, including China and Russia. Mr. DeVito played an instrumental role in developing and implementing much of that policy, after which he served as a federal congressman from 2015 to 2017. He will speak to us today on the topic of the necessary conditions for the development of the third world. Mr. DeVito, please.
Ahora sí. Ahora.
Now, can you hear me? You do hear me? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead and good afternoon. I want to express my agreement with the wishes for peace expressed by all the participants who are taking apart all of the machinery of the war machinery, such as NATO, and the victims not only of these attempts against democracy, but also those who suffer in their wallets the cost of this fake democracy and economic oppression. First of all, I would like to address your invitation to talk about the necessary conditions of development for countries in the third world, which are known today as emerging economies, which I would go back to calling the third world, because this is how they first appeared as an international political phenomenon. And first of all, the fundamental conditions that we see are to break with the foreign debt, and particularly the removal of the control of the so-called international financial institutions, particularly the International Monetary Fund. In the context of this liberation from debt, or the fiscal and budgetary independence needs to be achieved to be able to finance public investment. Then proactive regionalism, not only in regional infrastructure projects, but also the creation of financial instruments appropriate to each entity. We have some audio issues. Apologies.
También es otro concepto, especial hincapié en nuestros socios comerciales. Muchas veces vemos que estos países
our trade relations. We see often these countries have trade relationships with other countries that are very important for them, but politically there is an obstacle to them deepening these relationships. I will try to explain this from the standpoint of our experience in the Argentinian government from 2003 through 2015, particularly in the framework of the relationships that we had with other countries in the region. We must, first of all, it was clear that our elections program for 2015, that it was clear that in order to achieve economic independence and sovereignty, as well as social well-being, we needed to get out of debt, first of all. At this point, it is not just the foreign debt of Argentina, it's $189 billion that are a 59% of the GNP. Any progress that we could hope to get under these conditions was very little. And the IMF, within this total debt, had a $9 billion participation, which obligated the economy to an adjustments policy that prioritized foreign debt payment at the expense of social investment. All of this ended in 2001 with a number of with a violent death of many people and also material loss. One of the primary priorities was the planning of public investment goals for a territorial investment program that would prioritize public works infrastructure to address the needs of a population affected by poverty, which in May of 2003 was 21%, and a crisis made worse by all of the state contracts with privatized companies that had dollarized the cost of public services and utilities, as well as residential and educational and commercial construction, which were abandoned during the neoliberal reign. In this way, public investment abandoned its role of fostering industry and growth of the gross national product. Then, these economies had a need to enter the new technology economy, particularly in the area of communications. During that time, we designed and placed 2 satellites in orbit and also implemented a nuclear electric generation plan, building the Atucha 1 and Atucha 2 nuclear power plants, and working with our neighbor country, Paraguay, building a dam with a 3,200 megawatts generation capacity. Also, these external relationships needed to be developed without losing our ties to the West. Ideologically, we belong to justicialism, the justicialist movement, which in the international arena believes in engagement without neglecting our internal development, which, as General Perón said, should not be run against our interests in the international arena. But particularly since May 2003, it was clear to us that along this path, we would clearly have political allies in the region with whom we could join in the task, in a task in which we had common strategies and commitments. Brazilian President Lula was one of them. President Duarte Frutos of Paraguay, and then President Lugo of Paraguay, and also in Uruguay, President Mujica, and then afterwards, Evo Morales of Bolivia. Also, this the main object that was faced was obviously a foreign debt that was imposed primarily by the International Monetary Fund. So, within this, in this situation, the countries decided paying their debt to the fund without leaving that organization, but without abandoning their own national economic policy. That is a greater regional convergence, but this required also reaching foreign private creditors, which was reached in 2005 with a reduction of the interest payments and principal. At the same time, together with Brazil, we continued as before, working on reaching a budget and a balance of payments surplus, which would allow us to promote a foreign public investment program that would lead that would make these goals possible. Besides creating the Mercosur regional integration, we also launched the UNASUR that was took place in Peru, but was then followed by a coup that took place in Bolivia from the land-owning South against the indigenous North. But then Mercosur became one of the most irksome irritants for the ruling international elite. Venezuela also left the Andean Pact, which was to some degree the constituent element of the Lima group, which had a nefarious role. Chile and Peru, in the meantime, were leaning more towards the policies that we were promoting against, as I said before, the Lima group, which attempted to break down these agreements. So agreements on food security were signed, for instance. I participated at a meeting with Lula and Chavez, where a gas pipeline was proposed to join the hydrocarbon resources of Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, to give them regional relevance. And there was also a design similar to the Silk Road, the merging of the watersheds of the Amazonas, Plata, and Orinoco rivers, which would open up something similar to the Silk Road in the South American continent. Then we had the Mar del Plata summit, where the United States attempted to impose the FTAA, which would have destroyed the cooperation of our countries and the industrial and trade integration of Brazil and Argentina. During this time in Argentina, and then after our getting out of debt, we built 2,000 schools, 1.5 million homes, 5,500 routes of paved roads, 3,500 miles of secondary, 888 hospitals and clinics. Construction employment went from 328,000 to 737, and cement consumption increased by 35%. Public services utilization increased by a similar percentage. Audio issues, apologies. And the gross national product in 2003 is 495 million in audio. Again, I'm sorry. At any rate, the GNP, as Helga LaRouche was saying before, faced the consolidation of local oligarchies with a huge concentration of wealth. There was a rebellion of landowners in Argentina, and also the white crescent of Bolivia, as we called it before, that landed class. And this managed to pry Chile away from the Southern Union. Then the situation in Ecuador and the Atlanta Plan in 2012 was begun in the United States with the most reactionary representatives of Latin American trade interests and monopoly interests, or monopolized interests rather, led to a stigmatization of popular leaders and political processes, leading up to their prosecution and jailing, among whom I stood. And the right-wing local leaders organized operations that were promoted and strengthened by the so-called Atlanta consensus, to call it, as it were. All of this was accompanied by a rare epidemic of leaders dying of cancer. Dilma Fuentes, Hugo Chavez, and finally, by 2010, the process we've just described, it was slowed down, that this institutional program of what we call the Greater Motherland that was cut down by the Lima group and the I'm sorry, Mr. DeVito, if you would please wrap it up, because and finally, the Lula group opened up a new perspective for the region, which comes from multilateralism and association with other parts of the world in projects such as the new Silk Route, as proposed by Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. DeVito, for your firsthand historical account of the battle for development in the Ibero-American area of the world and the steps moving forward to link this up to the new Silk Road. We will hear next from Paulo Cannabrava Filho. He is a veteran Brazilian journalist and political activist who, over 6 decades, has written for many publications all across Ibero-America. He currently is the editor of Diálogos do Sul, Dialogues of the South, and he is an ardent supporter of the sovereignty, economic development, and integration of the nations of the global South. His topic today is the danger of nuclear war. The alternative is being built by the BRICS. And I think we're lacking sound. Mobilization of public figures.
Aquí se hace un llamado hacia la paz.
We make here
a call to peace is being made here. A mobilization of public figures worldwide in order to stop the danger of nuclear war now. As I see it, there's only one way to stop this danger, the danger of all wars. Stop the expansion of United States hegemony.
El riesgo de una guerra nuclear es inminente, es real.
There is an imminent risk of nuclear war. It is real as the insanity which affects certain leaders subservient to the great lords of capital, who have raised themselves up as the owners of the world. This risk must not succeed in diverting attention from the other war which is being fought against the world's peoples, especially in the West, under the hegemony of the dollar.
Se trata aquí de la guerra cultural y psicosocial, guerra mediática, guerra cibernética.
Here we mean the cultural, psychosocial war, media warfare, cybernetic warfare, the narrative war, which wields words as weapons. After less than 40 years since the signing of Yalta, a militarily and economically occupied Europe begins another 4 decades under the aegis of neoliberalism, in which finance capital and the Washington Consensus imposes a dictatorship as the model of economic management.
¿no? Desde el punto de vista del desarrollo económico y social, ¿no? Fueron 4 décadas perdidas.
From the point of view of economic and social development, they were 4 lost decades. The result can be summed up in such words as destatization, privatization, deindustrialization, denationalization, deregulation, job insecurity, unemployment, despair, misery, which have spread throughout the European Union as well as the developing countries.
Sumidos en crisis terminal del sistema y su modelo neoliberal.
Engulfed by the terminal crisis of the system and its neoliberal model, Europe finds itself dragged also into a military adventure by declaring war against Russia. Imposing an economic blockade is an act of war, just as supplying technology, arms, munitions, and intelligence to a belligerent power is per se an act of war. It is surprising that those most harmed by that war are the very countries which ignited it. It backfired. On top of an economic crisis which cannot be solved within the system, the energy crisis is added. Because of the blockade, prices skyrocketed, and there starts to be shortages of everything. And this as winter is coming on.
Y todo eso en aras de un orden mundial unipolar que no existe, ni nunca existió.
All of this for a unipolar world order that does not exist and never existed, because it takes into account a minority of less than 1/5 of the world's peoples. The United States needs to keep Europe colonized to survive. It has to keep Europe a colony for its war objectives in order to stop Russia, stop China, and despite everything, there is no longer room for hegemonies.
El mundo cambió. China es la mayor potencia económica.
The world has changed. China is the greatest economic power, and Russia is a military power, and the BRICS are now asserting themselves as a multipolar reality. And in a world of cooperation and integration, there is no room for invasions, occupation, and war. Regardless, the Biden doctrine makes it clear that for the empire, both China and Russia, as well as the BRICS, are the enemies to be fought. Despite all of that, on China's initiative, an alternative system is being built, free of the dollar system, which is based on cooperation for development and the construction of infrastructure to increase world trade.
Bautizado como Nueva Ruta de la Seda.
Baptized as the New Silk Road, it includes the BRICS Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and an alternative interbanking system based on a basket of local currencies whose foundations are the wealth of each country.
Los BRICS, Brasil, Rusia, India, China y Sudáfrica, representan más de la mitad de la población del planeta.
The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, represent more than half of the people on the planet. Since it is attractive because it points to independence and being free of control by the dollar, it already has candidates who want to join, such as Argentina and Mexico in our Americas, Iran, and even Saudi Arabia, which until recently was the faithful servant of the British and the Yankees. And soon enough, the BRICS will have 20 or more member countries. The United Nations says that the Earth's population has reached 8 billion human beings, and that there is a bomb, perhaps the greatest of all bombs, that is about to explode. And that is, there are 828 million people who go hungry, and which can become many, many more if the voraciousness of the consumer society continues, along with the predatory occupation of lands, if warming is not stopped, as the experts at COP27 meeting now in Egypt have stated to us.
Pero la solución para esta y las otras bombas está en la propuesta de los BRICS.
But the solution for this and the other bombs lies in the proposal of the BRICS, a proposal in which there is no room for hegemony, which is founded on cooperation among people for development, building infrastructure, strengthening intra-regional trade, the exchange of know-how, without impositions, to benefit all humanity. And that is how you build peace. And in that way, we shall win. Thank you very much, Mr. Cannabrava, for your remarks. With the expansion of the BRICS to include Argentina, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, perhaps many other countries, it's just very hard to know what the acronym is going to be, but we'll just call it BRICS Plus because it is going to be growing very rapidly, it seems. Our next speaker from Peru is Alberto Quintanilla. He served as a congressman from 2016 to 2019, and before that also from 1985 to 1992. Among his legislative accomplishments was to ensure that mining activity in Peru also contributed to raising the standard of living of the nearby populations. He currently remains actively involved in the politics in Peru, and he will speak today on the end of globalization and the emergence of the BRICS.
Very good day, friends. I am Alberto Quintanilla Chacon, a former federal congressman from Peru. Very good day, friends. I am Alberto Quintanilla Chacon, a former federal congressman from Peru, from the United Left and the Broad Front. Currently, we are experiencing quite a critical situation due to the war between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, which in reality is a war between NATO and the Russian Federation. And like all imperialist wars, this is a war for world hegemony. What we are seeing in the world today is the decline of the first world power, the United States. And we are also seeing the end of the globalization that we've lived through over recent decades. We are witnessing the emergence of a new world order where there is a multipolarity in which there are various blocs that have a force and a presence on a world scale, and this will lead to a situation of realignment. It is our hope that war, which is the continuation of politics by violent means, will always be condemned, because it is a violence that replaces reason. And we have already had the experiences of the First and Second World Wars, in which millions of citizens died, the majority of whom were innocents.
Y el caso más patético fue cómo se puso fin a la Segunda Guerra Mundial con las bombas que se lanzó Estados Unidos en Nagasaki.
The most pathetic case was how the United States put an end to the Second World War by dropping bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, in which more than 200,000 people died, more than 100,000 in one case and almost 100,000 in the other. We hope that in the future, diplomacy, dialogue, and peaceful solutions will be able to push to one side and postpone wars, which are certainly deadly, no matter how much the Geneva Convention is respected, or the use of the atomic bomb and other brutal forms of mass destruction are prohibited. What is occurring in the war between Ukraine and the Russian Federation began on February 21st, 2022, in which the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, recognized the sovereignty and existence of the republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, led by pro-Russian authorities. Then on February 24th, meeting a political military commitment, Russian troops entered Ukrainian territory, leading to the war that we are currently living through and in which there is not yet a clear winner. But what we can see is that world peace is the first to be defeated, and the second loser is NATO, the North Atlantic Alliance, which in practice is the mask that the United States dons for these cases. And NATO is the big loser because it no longer receives the gas it used to receive from the Russian Federation to meet Europe's energy needs. This is also one of the issues.
En segundo lugar, hay un claro vencedor, es que después de esta guerra.
Secondly, there is a clear winner. After this war, it is clear that we are moving toward a more multipolar world in which there won't be just one hegemony of the United States, seconded by NATO, but there will be rather a more diverse situation. We hope that this will really create a better environment so that the United Nations can strengthen diplomacy and conversations as a solution to the political military problems, such that we don't go to war. War should always be a last thing we resort to and should be proscribed by peace and by our condition as human beings who have the ability to dialogue and reach agreements without resorting to violence. This current conflict really began due to NATO's expansionist desires, of course, with the support of the United States, which sought to lay siege to the Russian Federation and surround it, let's say, with certain powers, among them Ukraine. Ukraine had promised not to join NATO because this was a demand of the Russian Federation to avoid being surrounded by NATO. Nonetheless, NATO continued to move forward, creating a very dangerous situation which Mr. Putin, leader of the Russian Federation, sought to resolve through violence. We hope that peace can begin to gain ground in dealing with these problems, that diplomacy is able to resolve these problems, and that it is recognized that there have been changes in the world panorama such that hegemonic groups, beginning with the United States and the European Union, accept that we are heading into a multipolar world where there will be greater balance. We hope that China, which is apparently not directly involved in this war, will be one of the winners in the economic conflict taking place in the world, and that it can really contribute with other economic blocs, such as the BRICS, the Russian Federation, the European Union, China itself, and India, to create a world in which differences are resolved through negotiations and diplomacy, and war will be definitively prohibited. No one wants a third world war. We had enough with the First and Second World Wars. The loss of human life and the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima should never again be repeated. Let us pray for peace and call on all the political representatives of the world, and above all in Latin America, to come out in favor of peace and to end the war between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, which has brought us to the brink of a third world war, which no one wants. Let us pray for peace, understanding, and dialogue, and that they replace violence, death, and the desolation of the world's population. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Quintanilla, for your remarks. And I would like to apologize to you and to all of the Spanish speakers for the technical difficulties we just had and the fact that you were listening to a portion of Congressman Quintanilla's speech in English. The posted version on the website will have the original Spanish. And again, my apologize. Again, for the benefit of our interpreters, the next remarks, which were delivered in Spanish and dubbed into English, will also need to be interpreted into Spanish on the Spanish channel. And this is the last panelist of this first panel. His name is Pedro Paez. He was Minister for Economic Policy Coordination from 2007 to 2008 in the government of Rafael Correa in Ecuador. He is an economist by training, and he was also president of the Ecuadorian Commission for the Design of a New Financial Architecture, as well as the country's representative to the Banco del Sur, the Bank of the South, which was previously mentioned. He delivers a brief greeting to today's conference. Mr. Paez.
Agradezco mucho la invitación del Instituto Schiller para un evento que, como este, debería repetirse desde todas las corrientes del pensamiento económico.
My great thanks to the Schiller Institute for this invitation to an event like this, which should be repeated among all currents of economic thought, given the extremely grave conjuncture which Latin America has to face in the context of such a difficult international conjuncture. The challenges posed by the demise of Anglo-American hegemony regarding a new foreign debt trap and a new Cold War put our continent in a particularly vulnerable situation in the face of destructive forces which, on the one hand, need to regain their profitability, and on the other, to reinforce their backyard in the context of a process of monetary, commercial, and technological fragmentation which could involve conflicts within our continent, conflicts tied to the dynamics of speculation, money laundering, and other problems which are totally removed from what should be productive capital and the investment of productive capital.
Está mucho más vinculada a la dinámica del polo que se está construyendo en torno a Asia y sobre todo.
We need to be much more linked to the dynamic process of the pole, which is being built around Asia, but above all, to the potential of Eurasia, which is the great nightmare of Anglo-American geopolitics. I think that it is indispensable to fight for these things by building a new financial architecture which could be the foundation of a new peace policy of development of our continents. A new financial architecture within our countries on a continental level, and at the level of reviving the spirit of Bandung insofar as Indonesia now chairs the G20, which should once again feature the legacy of Sukarno with the unity of the countries of Africa, Latin America, and Asia in building a new definition of South-South cooperation, but also to fight for a new global financial architecture.
Y esta nueva arquitectura financiera requiere, en primer lugar, tener un nuevo tipo de moneda, no una moneda vinculada a la explotación y a la especulación.
This new financial architecture requires, first of all, having a new kind of currency, not a currency tied to the exploitation and speculation, which has defined the dollar's world monopoly over liquidity, financial transactions, and credit, but instead a currency which allows new areas of communication between peoples, deepening integration, brotherhood, production, the creative potential of people, and this clearly requires putting up firewalls. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Paez. And we have now come to the part of the discussion for questions and answers and discussion among the panelists. Because of the lateness of the hour, what I believe we're going to do is to open the floor to a discussion among the panelists and to comment on what they have heard, perhaps to discuss back and forth among themselves, and then we will have possibly time for a couple of questions. If those questions are not asked in this panel, I urge people who are watching this program to send in their questions nonetheless to questions@schillerinstitute.org, and they will be taken up at the end of the second panel. So let me begin by asking Helga Zepp-LaRouche first, and then Congressman Robles for their responses and reactions and discussion about what they have heard so far to open up this part of the process. Helga?
Well, I'm very happy about the speakers I have heard so far, because I think it makes very clear what may not be so obvious if you don't put a conference like this together, that the problems which we experience in Europe, especially in Germany and in the vicinity of the war, which is actually taking place in the middle of Europe, that de facto the problems of Latin America and those of Europe are very similar, and that the conflict is really not between countries, but it is this oligarchical imperial system which is bothering the people of both continents. And I think it's also very important that there is an agreement, at least among some of the speakers, that the solution lies in the new economic system, which is fortunately happening with the BRICS and SCO and Eurasian Economic Union and other countries of the global south. So I think this conference discussion hopefully will energize, the need for people to really demand that this war stops. The idea of a world citizens movement is the time has come, and that we have to build a new world economic order in the short term. And in that sense, I'm extremely pleased about the discussion so far.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Congressman Robles, could you give us your comments and responses to what you've heard so far?
Por supuesto, con muchísimo gusto.
Of course, I'll be very glad to. First of all, I want to thank again Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute, for your promotion and leadership of this fight that has the total support of the greater part of the population. I believe that we've come together once again to voice aloud our intention of stopping the irrationality of a nuclear war with crimes against humanity. After hearing the presentations of our various speakers, we have explained much of this. This is a third meeting in which we establish anew the need for organizational efforts for world peace. I think we have to continue organizing and do more. I think most Mexican legislators, I will tell all of you, feel just as our president, Manuel López Obrador, feels, who has demanded the immediate initiation of negotiations to eliminate the danger of nuclear war. For this reason, I want to reiterate that in the previous seminar on the 27th October, when I ventured a call to all legislators of the continent and the world for a dialogue with leaders and governments of the world for world peace. And I should say that the basis of this call was based on the traditions established by President Benito Juarez and a principle which is fundamental to Mexican thought. Juarez said, and I repeat again what he's saying, that among nations as among individuals, respect for the rights of others is peace, which has been complemented by the Estrada doctrine of respect for self-determination and non-intervention in the sovereign affairs of every nation. Yet, friends, since that past seminar through today, the provocations staged by bellicose world powers continue to increase on a daily basis. And this occurs not only on the front of war, but also the exacerbation of monetarist measures, such as the increase of interest rates leading to rates of inflation where the most vulnerable populations are ultimately the losers, which leads to a further intensification of the overall crisis. This is why I reiterate that the integration of the political and social leaders worldwide to rein in the danger of war needs to be coupled with a economic program which makes it necessary, as in the ecumenic proposal from 25 years ago, is that such as where it was said that development is the new name of peace. Therefore, Mrs. Zepp-LaRouche, we hope and pray that the proposals presented here can be implemented at the fastest possible rate, and especially faster than the trend towards nuclear war, which threatens humanity. Thank you again. We'll see you soon, and thank you for everything, my dear friend Dennis.
Very good. Joining us for this dialogue session, in addition to Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Congressman Benjamín Robles Montoya, we have Karl Köchel of Germany. We have Mr. Julio Devido of Argentina, Paulo Cannabrava of Brazil, and Alberto Quintanilla of Peru. I also understand that it would be good, if possible, to bring up the video for Congresswoman Maria de Los Angeles Huerta, unless the technical problem is on her side, but she will be involved in the keynote of the next panel, but she certainly would like to be involved in this part of the discussion as well. So the floor is actually now open for any of the panelists who would like to make an additional comment, discuss what they heard from others. Either raise your hand or turn on your microphone or just start speaking. Oh, great. We have Steve Starr as well. I wasn't aware of that he would be with us. And so you're first off the blocks with your hand up, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I had a question about the level of propaganda in Germany. The mainstream news that we get here in the United States basically has Americans convinced that Russia is losing the war and Russia is desperate. I assume that you hear the same things in Germany, and I've seen reports that the German government has passed a law that makes a 3-year prison sentence for anyone that supports the Russian war effort. Do you think there's any of the German members, I have a question, do you think that there's any chance that this can change with maybe a change in government? Do you think that the economic straits are so dire there in Germany that people are going to wake up and, because I think that's critical, I think, to change Europe? Thank you.
Assume you ask me?
Anyone who cares to answer is fine.
Well, Helga,
I
since
can say,
Mr. Kirchhoff is apparently not on this part of the discussion, so the question definitely, I believe, is directed to you.
well, first of all, I want to thank the three Americans who spoke, you, Professor Starr, and Senator Black and Scott Ritter, because I think that, given the fact that the, mentality of the Germans is one of underlings in respect to the Anglo-American colonial powers, it is very, very important to hear from real Americans, that this is not the entire story. So this is very helpful. Otherwise, I would say, I'm very encouraged about the different people speaking from the German demonstrations, like Mr. Kröckel, and we will hear some others, I think, also in the next period. Because, it is very clearly that, the control of, the occupying powers, NATO, Scholz, the chancellor, said in a speech in mid-February, he said he does not want to send heavy weapons to Ukraine because he doesn't want to risk World War III. It took only 3 days for Austin to come to Ramstein, convene their military meeting of 40 countries, and then they collapsed and they said, we send all the weapons necessary. So I think, it is really a battle. Will the German people be able in time to recognize that the very existence of Germany is at stake? I think a lot will depend on how the German question will resolve. And, this government we have right now, in my view, is the worst. Not so much because of Scholz, who I don't want to make comments on right now because he does some steps which are not quite horrible, but because of the green component in the government, Habeck and Baerbock. They're like incarnated with NATO. You cannot differentiate what Stoltenberg and Blinken and various British people are saying to what they are saying. So we are really, this is not a government representing the German interest. So the problem is, however, that the other parties are very much infected with Atlanticists as well. This is a long story. BlackRock has a big role in the career of some of these politicians. So I think what we really need is a deep discussion about why it is in the interest of Germany to ally with this new system which is emerging of the BRICS, the SCO, and the other organizations of the Global South. Germany is an export country. If we do not break out of this present war dynamic, Germany will cease to exist. This will be an existential question in the next weeks and months. And therefore, I think this mobilization of world citizens of all countries unite is really going to be the lifeline for Germany. And I want to thank you very much for your intervention and help.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, great. I have a question which I would like to address to the 3 Latin American participants who are on at this point and participated in this panel. We will then turn to Donald Ramotar, who is the former president of Guyana, but addressed jointly to each and every one of you who would care to respond to Mr. Devido, Mr. Cannabrava, Mr. Quintanilla. Among you, there was a lot of discussion of accomplishments and things in the past, but also looking to the future, the possibility of the BRICS joining forces with other groups around the world, other countries, other regions, to help create a new development and security architecture. I would like to ask you, what are the prospects moving forward? What are the prospects of unity among different Latin American countries, including those represented here? And how can this all be brought together, in your view, with what you have heard about Europe, what you've seen from the United States, and what we know is going on in Asia? It's a very broad question, but take it away. So perhaps Mr. DeVito first.
Ahí está. Los
Well,
BRICS me parece es una herramienta
BRICS seems to me a key tool because it is complete with ideological multilateralism and international cooperation. I think many countries are inclined to join BRICS in Latin America. Shall we say, for instance, Brazilian elections have shined a light of hope to break the hegemony of neoliberalism, which took form in the creation of the Lima group that was such a setback to all of these projects to integrate the waterways and the gas pipelines and the establishment of the UNASUR Development Bank. That is, all the many projects that from all of a sudden were suspended with elections both here in Argentina, Brazil. Lula was arrested and there was such persecution against the Argentinian President Kirchner, and which strengthened the hegemony that was working against multilateralism.
Okay, then Mr. Quintanilla, Congressman Quintanilla from Peru, please.
Bueno, soy ex congresista por izquierda.
I'm a former congressman on the left. I think that the prospects in the world are based on, come from the breakdown of unipolar globalism. The breakdown of U.S. hegemony is apparent. It has put blinders on the European Union and NATO. What will emerge from this is a multipolar perspective in which Latin America needs to forcefully retake the idea of Latin American integration, where we've had some successes and some failures. But with the new wave of progressive governments, such as we have in Chile, Colombia, now in Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia, and others who may come later, we could begin to think of forming an alliance in Latin America, which would serve as a counterbalance to U.S. hegemony in this part of the world, and also an opening to multipolarity worldwide. I think the prospects are good, but there's much work ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take over from Dennis. And I see there's a hand up by Mr. Donald Ramutar, who's the former president of Guyana, and he's also a former member of parliament. So please, you can ask your questions or give your comment, Mr. Ramutar.
I just want to give a comment. One of the panelists mentioned just now that that the United States ended the war with Germany. It ended the war, the Second World War, by dropping bombs in Japan. And I think that is probably playing into a narrative that the Americans themselves talked about, that if they didn't do that, many, many more lives would have saved, even though so many people died in Japan. But the point I wanted to make, it was not the United States that ended the war. The war was ended by the Red Army in the first instance, and Germany surrendered in May. The bombs were dropped in Japan when they were no danger, when they were almost defeated, when it was clear that they were defeated already, and it was for a demonstration effect aimed at the Soviet Union, and it was totally unnecessary and really inhuman in many ways. And as I have the microphone, I would like to just also raise a question, and probably Mr. Scott Ritter or one of the other Europeans can help answer. Because of the information that we get here is so limited, we are so bombarded with the corporate media telling us. So we're not very, very clear of what is happening. I mean, we heard Russia withdrawing from some key areas where they had referendum and people voted for them. And we know that weapons are pouring in there. What are the real, what is the real situation? Is Russia really, as they are claiming, losing this war?
Well, I could try to speak for Mr. Ritter. I don't know if he's still with us or not. I've listened to quite a few.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I also listened to Colonel Douglas McGregor, but the way I understand it is Russia invaded Ukraine with a much smaller force than was necessary to conquer Ukraine. It was they called it a special military operation. The point was to protect the people in the Donbass who were under assault from the Ukrainian army. What they didn't expect was that NATO was going to come in full force to fight them with billions of dollars of equipment and mercenaries and everything else. So what's happened with that was that some of the Russians had to regroup and mobilize 300,000 men plus another 80,000 volunteered. Their withdrawals were considered tactical withdrawals from Kherson City and Kharkov in order to consolidate their front lines while the forces that they mobilized were making their way to the front. McGregor and Ritter both will tell you that Russia is preparing a large offensive. Once the ground freezes, they'll be able to carry it out. So we're sort of in an interim period right now. McGregor has said that Anthony Blinken had threatened the Russians that if they carry this offensive out, the U.S. will intervene with 40,000 troops, 30,000 Polish and 20,000 Romanian troops. Hopefully that's not true, but he had gotten that information. But to answer your question, that's a long answer, but basically Russia is not losing the war. The dialogue, it's war propaganda, and that's all we've gotten here in the United States since it began. It's I worry about it because if you can frame Russia as being desperate and losing the war, then it opens up for a false flag attack that can be blamed on Russia that would allow NATO to enter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe I can ask Helga to weigh in on the last two comments, especially on the Japan and Hiroshima bombing question, because I know this has been a central theme in the organizing of you and your late husband, Lyndon LaRouche. He made a big point about the, this phase shift that went on after the death of Franklin Roosevelt, with Truman coming in, and that the policies have been completely shifted. Maybe you can make your assessment.
Yes, I think that there is now plenty historic evidence that this bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were dropped exactly for the reason Mr. Omata said. As a matter of fact, the Japanese had already surrendered. There were already peace talks or surrender talks, capitulation talks with the Pope at that time. So it was a complete, I mean, inhuman is a diplomatic way of calling it. It's the first bomb, nuclear bomb, which was dropped for purely, demonstrative reason, the principle of Schrecklichkeit. So I think that, that historical truth should be made more known, because, I think this whole idea about the good democracies, I think this is really something which, America was great when it was a republic, when it was founded, but the principles of the American Revolution need to be urgently re-established, because what happened in the meantime is, and it started with Truman and Churchill, and then step by step the Kennedy assassination, and one can name many steps. The British have taken over, and the promise of the American Revolution, fighting the war in the first war of independence against the colonial power, as President Sukarno had stressed in his speech in Bandung in 1955, that was betrayed And, the British, after they realized that they could not defeat America militarily in the War of 1812 and then in the Civil War, they resorted to the idea to subvert the American establishment, to take over the role of the British Empire for the unipolar world. And that is exactly what started with the assassination of President McKinley, and then Woodrow Wilson joining the First World War on the side of the British. And there were a few exceptions with FDR and Kennedy. Kennedy got assassinated. But I think, the problem we have right now is that the majority of the American establishment takes the role of the British Empire as the basis of the unipolar world, running the world as based on this British American special relationship. And I think that is what is the cause of many of the problems. And I think the sooner people recognize that is the problem, because the British have played a role in instigating, the whole issue of false flags. We could go through a long list, from chemical weapons supposedly used by the Syrian government, the Skripal affair, much of the Navalny affair. The British are masters in false flags. And they have, it was mentioned already, it was Boris Johnson who sabotaged the peace negotiations in April, when even Zelensky was ready to negotiate and find an end to the war. And right now, the quote I mentioned from the Rusi Institute, I mean, this, I have the sense that, when you cannot discuss that there is a prehistory to how this horrible crisis erupted, namely 30 years of NATO expansion and, the sabotage of the Minsk agreement, Poroshenko admitting, that they only used that as a pretext to have time to train the Ukrainian military. If you can mention that, but the British can say, let's lead the world to the brink of nuclear war, and only in this Cuban crisis on steroids, as he called it, is maybe the time we can get a capitulation of Russia and a diplomatic agreement. I think this is criminal. Is there not something like a Nuremberg Code, which prevents the preparation of a war of aggression? And I think that the Western governments are accepting that and are not immediately denouncing such a policy proposal as being completely unacceptable. That puts into question the entire credibility of this rules-based order, because it's just totally something which should not continue to exist.
Yes, for the reasons of fairness, I would like to say that Mrs. de los Angeles Huerta had her hand up for quite some time, and I hope she can make a comment now.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to briefly, first of all, greet Helga and all of the participants very warmly, and also express to you that it is very important for us in Mexico to second the most fortunate participation of Congressman Robles Montoya, who I believe has stated quite exactly what needs to be done, not only in the Latin American case, but the world at large, to attract all sectors of legislative bodies, first of all, but all other leadership groupings to participate very actively in this call that the Schiller Institute has made so clear today and in previous meetings. I would like to also add, as most of our presenters have laid out, the narrative that is being spread against Russia and the attempt to consolidate or go back to the way of hegemonic powers, insisting on holding the truth. They are trying to spread a false belief all around the world concerning who are truly responsible for this problem. I believe that we cannot forget history, for instance, what happened during the Second World War and how German fascists in Germany supporting Hitler and so forth systematically repeated a lie until they were able to situate that in the world. It seems, and in a few minutes, when I have my afternoon presentation, I will go into more detail, but I would like to just outline for now that we cannot neglect how the fascist right is trying again worldwide to monopolize attention and beliefs by spreading lies, which could become, again, realities if we are not forceful enough in calling this out and bringing together world forces to counterbalance the power of those who wish to drag us into this war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I see that Professor Starr's hand is up. I would like, yes, to give your comment. Before you give your comment, I would like to say we should spread your video that you showed today as far as possible. It's not just your students at the University of Missouri that don't know the horrific effects, the humanity-ending effects of nuclear war. I think it's the larger, the majority of citizens worldwide that do not know, especially the Germans, maybe, I don't know even. So maybe you can say a few words on how can we spread your message far out, and then you can, of course, say what you wanted to say.
Well, there's a treaty that's been passed at the United Nations called the Treaty to Prohibit Nuclear Weapons. And part of the reason that treaty was passed was because all the nuclear weapon states boycotted the negotiations for it. But during those negotiations, some of the scientists that did the studies on nuclear winter were able to testify, and I think they got the message across that the people in the Southern Hemisphere are just as much at risk from nuclear war as the people in the Northern Hemisphere, just through starvation. And I think that promoted the idea that nuclear weapons needed to be banned, just like chemical and biological weapons. The problem is that what I worry about in the United States is that the neocons that are running U.S. foreign policy are really ignorant as my students, I think, about nuclear war. And also, I think they're brainwashed with the idea that they can win a nuclear war. In about 2006 or 7, the Council on Foreign Relations published through Foreign Affairs an article called The Rise of U.S. Nuclear Primacy by Lieber and Press. And this promoted the idea that the United States had gotten what they called, a first strike ability that would completely eliminate Russia's ability to respond with a counterattack. So in other words, I'm afraid that they think they can enter into this war and Russia's going to back down. So that's not the case. As in regard to Hiroshima, I wanted to add to what was said by saying that, Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Tokyo were the only cities that weren't firebombed by the United States Air Force. There were 67 Japanese cities that were basically burned to the ground. They saved Hiroshima and Nagasaki for the atomic bombs. They wanted to use those to demonstrate, and they also wanted to see what the effects would be on a city that hadn't been firebombed. So I would agree that, these were immoral acts and they were unnecessary to end the war.
Okay, very good. I'll jump in at this point in terms of moderating the home stretch of this discussion. I think it certainly is the case that it's not only Germans that are unaware of the consequences of this, I think, and it's not only your students, Professor Starr, it's most Americans are blissfully unaware and don't want to know that this would be the end of the human species as we know it if this is not stopped. The implications of this for action are overwhelming. I absolutely second Stefan's proposal that we get your presentation, as well as all of these others, out far and wide. We have to wake people up. And I can also tell you that in my discussions with people in Ibero-America and other parts of the third world, they also are in general disbelief. The most common question I get when I discuss these policies that Helga was laying out previously from Russia and so on is, come on, are they that crazy? How is that possible? And I think it should be very clear to everybody at this point that yes, they are. They are that crazy, they are that desperate, and there is no other alternative than our mobilizing, as we are doing here now, to make sure that this policy is ended once and for all. But I would like to now go to the wrap-up with final statements, closing remarks from each of the panelists who are still with us, and perhaps in this order. We have about 15 minutes left, so maybe 3 minutes each. First, Mr. Quintanilla, then Mr. Devido, then Mr. Starr, then Congressman Robles, and then we'll ask Helga Zepp-LaRouche to wrap up for us. So, former Congressman Quintanilla, please.
Gracias. Gracias. Yo quiero empezar señalando de
Thank you.
que
I would like to begin by pointing out that I have misquoted the fact that the U.S. Launching the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war. No, what you said is true. The war was indeed over concerning the German, Italian, and Japanese powers, but it was an act of terror, which we must insist unconditionally that this is something can never be allowed to happen again. The other matter is that we need to build awareness so that in the future, if this will not end up in a nuclear war and will lead to a multilateral world, not with a hegemony of superpowers, but with a multiplicity of interests to reach agreements and avoid war, and hopefully we can avoid the present confrontation between NATO, United States, Ukraine, and Russia take place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to ask Mr. Julio Devido for his final closing comments and recommendations about where this movement must move from here forward.
Bueno,
well,
¿me escuchan bien, no?
Can you hear me?
No, creo que está un poco todo dicho. Que
I think it has all been said. The meeting has met its goal. It is essential to work on regionalism in a very proactive way for physical integration and, of course, to develop the financial tools required to carry these projects forward, particularly in the case of third world emerging economies that were often referenced today. And we must have a critical view of the mission and function of the United Nations Security Council, which on the one hand is entirely proactive. But however, with the veto function of certain powers, all they do is keep conflicts frozen, which later explode again. So from Helga LaRouche's first statements, I believe we need to focus on the concentration of wealth in an oligarchy, which may be growing, but is still a very small minority relative to the population of all our countries. And this concentration of wealth produces a kind of recycling or resurgence of fascism, of disdain for the poor, for the unemployed. And we need to, I believe, return to this historical effort by by Lula and General Lugarte, Rafael Correa, Evo Morales. I think we do have presidents that we must see as the model ahead. It is very difficult to rebuild that, but the election, Lula's re-election in Brazil is a very polarizing event, which divides society into different sectors, but we cannot relax our alertness. The BRICS is another extremely important prospect, which Latin America could have a strong participation in, giving it the strength that the times require. Also, the example of the new Silk Road, something that you sent me by Mrs. LaRouche, is also key. Land bridges as well as maritime and riverway systems need to be developed for a better use of nature and to cancel the hegemonic efforts of the unipolar powers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we turn to Professor Starr for his closing remarks.
I do think it's terribly important that the people in the world come to understand that the launch-ready nuclear arsenals of Russia and the United States represent a self-destruct mechanism for the human race. But beyond that, I think it's equally important that people give a vision of hope, and that's why I commend you all for discussing the BRICS path of diplomacy. You know, here in the US, people may not know about nuclear weapons, but they're sick of war. You know, we have 43 million Americans living in dire poverty. There's 40% of American children live in some degree of poverty right now. Our infrastructure is crumbling. But every time we turn on the TV, it's $1 billion for Ukraine or $30 billion to Ukraine. It's war, war, endless war. And it hasn't just started with this administration. We've been fighting wars. And it doesn't matter who you elect to be president in the United States, it's always war. So I think it's possible to change the Americans, and hopefully the people in Western Europe can come to understand that their governments need to change. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. And now we turn to Congressman Robles for his closing remarks, please.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Well, I will repeat my call for legislators, former legislators, political and social leaders, continue raising our voices. The history of humanity must remind us that many, many years ago, our civilizations were terminated by natural events. It would be a terrible thing if we were to add to our planet's history that we humans ourselves destroy our world, which is exactly what we face, the danger of a nuclear war that no one would escape. I am very aware of the efforts of the Schiller Institute, headed by our friend Helga, and your continuing efforts. What we here have done, former Congresswoman Ángeles Huerta, and yours truly, is to join this crusade, because we don't want to merely be preoccupied, but occupy ourselves, get busy with what needs to be done. As well as it has been said, it is the economic elite of the world who manipulates the world and makes sure that their interests are placed before the interests of the people of the world. No one in their right mind wants a war, and far even less so a war that threatens the existence of the human race itself. Therefore, we reiterate and emphasize our commitment to the peace efforts headed by the Schiller Institute, as well as the positions of every speaker that we have listened to with great attention. The call still stands. Let us act now to stop the danger of nuclear war. Long live peace, long live the world. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Congressman Robles. And we now turn to Helga Zepp-LaRouche for closing remarks for this panel.
I think it is very clear that the unipolar world is gone already. It will never be revived. The multipolar world does exist already, which in one sense it's good because, you know, it does have alternatives like the BRICS, which was mentioned many times. However, I don't think that's good enough because, you know, if we do not win over the United States and Europe for that matter, I'm afraid that the West, so-called, will not dissolve as peacefully as the Soviet Union did in 91. And therefore, the multipolar world still contains the element of geopolitics, and that puts on the table very clearly the requirement that we move to a higher phase. And I have called it, you know, the coincidence of opposites. This is the concept of Nicolaus of Cues, coincidentia oppositorum, which is the idea that the human mind is able to always come up with the higher one, which has a higher power than the many. And in this case, the higher one is the one humanity, which we have to think first. Xi Jinping calls it the shared community for the joint future of mankind, which is very similar in the orientation. For this reason, I would like to ask people to be so kind to consider the principles which I mentioned in my initial presentation as food for thought and subject for discussion. Because if we want to propose in earnest a new security and development architecture, the question is how you do that. You know, the Peace of Westphalia, this was 4 years of negotiations in Münster, which was just, you know, an insult added to by so-called foreign minister of Germany, who went to Münster to have the G7 meeting there, not discussing peace, but to discuss confrontation. And interestingly enough, she felt it necessary to take the cross off the walls of the room. Now, when you feel that the presence of a cross is not suitable to your intentions, well, there is a word for that, which I don't want to use right now, but, you know, people can think it out themselves. But more seriously, the question is, what should be the principles on which this new security and development architecture is based? And I made a first attempt, you know, by trying to lay down some of the principles on which all the countries eventually have to agree, like they did after 4 years of negotiation in Münster, in the case of the Peace of Westphalia. So I would actually be very happy if some of the participants, the panelists, but also the listeners would share their views on what should be the principles of the new, you know, one humanity kind of security system and development system. What should be the principles we base it on? So I would ask you to take my thoughts as a reference point and then contribute whatever you think is necessary, because I think that discussion is urgently necessary, because people ask, you know, if not this order, what should be the order which we give ourselves? So I thank all of you for your contributions and hope that you are all on board to expand this effort as rapidly as possible, because I really seriously think that there will be new provocations before the end of the year, and we have to have a very strong force around the world to counter that.
forward. I want to thank everyone, each and every one of the participants in this panel, and thank you for your time and your patience, and encourage all of you as well to return for the second panel, which will begin 1 hour from now, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States, 1 p.m. in Mexico and elsewhere. And the topic will be Peace Through Development, where we can continue this discussion, which we have only begun in the panel discussion today. Thank you very much. And let us view this as an appropriate way to remember the 22nd of November and the assassination of John Kennedy by recommitting ourselves to resolving and settling once and for all the danger of war through development.